Hello and welcome everyone to November's CloudBytes webinar. We're so happy to have you here. As you can see, we are discussing our 2020 highlights hosted by Jim Norton, Dean Dorton's Software Services Manager.
Thank you, Julia. Hi, everyone. This is Jim Norton, Manager of Software Consulting, here to talk with you about Sage Intacct's 2020 fourth quarterly release. And this may be one of the largest releases that I've ever seen them do. So we have a lot of content to cover. I'll be going through it as efficiently as possible and demoing a bunch of the new features that I think are really exciting. As the first thing you may have noticed is the R4 release did not happen on a Friday, as people are used to seeing that happen. It happened on a Sunday. And that was because of the holiday, Diwali, over in India. You know, Intacct is expanding more and more globally and releasing in all these different countries, and everybody's teams are all around the world. So they rescheduled that release to let their colleagues celebrate those festivities. A reminder here, it's always good to review your permissions whenever there's a new release. What happens often is new features come out, and in order to access those new features and see those new features, you need to have permissions to do so. So it is always a good time to go check your role permissions, your user permissions, and make sure that you're not missing out on anything that was released. There's no such thing as an automatically granted permission. Just a reminder, everything that we are going to talk about today is also available to you in great detail and in some cases in video form in the Sage Intacct Help Center. They have a great section on the release notes, so you can see, video of all the different release highlights, certain other videos that they've made on some key topics, and very detailed release notes for everything, far more detailed than I could cover in an hour. So the key areas that I'm going to hit on today, and as you can see, there are 10, which is a lot, but we'll talk about 1099, changes that happened in admin and company, cash management, APAR, purchasing, MultiTax, things that have happened in reporting, and things that have happened in reporting as it relates to IGC, so global consolidations, as it relates to multi-entity shared, and as it relates to reporting on inter-entity transactions, some changes that have happened in order entry and inventory, and then anything else that's a notable change. So I'll start out with the first topic, which I'm sure many of you have bumped into an incident or two related to the 1099 changes. So in keeping with the IRS changes to Form 1099, there is no longer a Form 1099 miscellaneous box 7, and that is because it's not really Intacct's fault. It's the IRS for apparently throwing another log on the fire that was 2020 because it wasn't bad enough, and deciding to get rid of that box in the year 2020. So the 1099 miscellaneous no longer has a box 7, and they have released a form, which used to be a form before, called the 1099 NEC, where you report 1099 non-employee compensation. So most of your amounts that used to be in 1099 miscellaneous box 7 probably now need to be in 1099 NEC box 4. The other changes in the Form 1099 miscellaneous, there's been some renumbering of certain boxes. So what used to be box 14, which was gross proceeds paid to an attorney, is now box 10, gross proceeds paid to an attorney. Should not be any action needed on that second one, but you definitely have action needed on the 1099 miscellaneous box 7 if you have not already dealt with that. So how do we handle that? There are a lot of instructions out there for how to handle the update, if you have not already handled the update, of moving your vendor amounts or your vendor default boxes from 1099 miscellaneous box 7 to 1099 NEC box 1. And we can share with you, if anybody has questions or cannot find it in the help, just open a support ticket with us and we will point you to the extensive documentation. They've done a really good job writing this up. But essentially, you have a few options. So you can use a transaction update template, which is a CSV template. You can update your vendor record, so you can change your vendor's box to 1099 NEC Box 1, and then you're going to get this pop-up box that's showing up on the middle of the slide here, how you would like to apply these updates. So you could have the 1099 NEC Box 1 basically retroactively updated to all the transactions that you have paid in 2020 so far. And then finally, you can walk through all the different steps of the help to do some combination of the two, or to make a better decision about what approach fits you best based on the volume that you're dealing with. Now, if you do choose to use the CSV template to make this migration, this is a screenshot of what's very important that you fill out and fill out correctly so that it does that change for you. And you will get this in the materials that we're sending out after the call. And if anyone has questions or needs help with this process, just log a ticket with us and we will be happy to help. And at the end of the slide, I put the email address that you send support tickets to in case anyone is not familiar with that. So that's 1099. Obviously, when you go to actually make that change, it will take you a little bit longer than it took me to cover that, but that's what changed in 1099. Now for administration and company, one major change they came out with is selecting a user as your administrative contact. So in your company settings, you're going to have an administrative contact, which used to be named main contact. Only a full admin user can be selected here. And once you select the valid user, as you see in the screenshot here, it's going to auto-populate their contact information. If you need to inactivate your full admin user, so say they have moved on, they have retired, whatever the case may be, and you need to switch it, you have to make sure that you go and assign a new admin user first, or you're not going to be able to deactivate whoever is associated with this administrative contact. Another great administrative change that I think a lot of people have seen as a long time coming is we are now masking social security numbers. So you can choose a checkbox here in your company settings that enables employee social security number masking. So if you're using the employee social security number, which a lot of people aren't, but if you're putting it in there for something like, employee issued 1099s, check this box if you want to have a little bit more privacy around the social security numbers that are on file inside Intacct for your employees. All right, cash management. So in cash management, we have some good updates. First off, with bank and credit card validations. People were having issues in the past if they made a change to their bank account. So say you wanted to change the GL account number associated with your bank account. That's a bad idea. And some people got in the habit of adopting that bad idea and unsurprisingly started to have issues trying to reconcile their bank account because they were trying to reconcile a bank account that lived in multiple GLs. And that is not how things work in our world. So Intacct has introduced some controls around this to help protect people from having those problems. Certain fields are now not editable once you've posted a single transaction against the cash account. So you cannot change the GL account, you cannot change the currency, and you cannot change the location once you started transacting with that account. Again, this prevents reconciliation issues, which people were running into when these fields did not have as tight control over them. Another change, so the credit card number in cash management. When you set up your credit card accounts in cash management, the credit card number honestly was rather useless, except for one use case. So there's no longer a credit card number field in your credit card screen in cash management because it didn't do anything. The only exception being, if you are subscribed to Amex Payment Services and you create an Amex card, you will be able to enter that number because you need that number to process payments that are paid via an Amex card using Amex Payment Services. Any case besides that, you will not have the ability to enter a card number because it never gets used anywhere. So it was just a security risk sitting out there that gave nobody any value. Bank reconciliation. So some nice improvements to bank rec. As you may know, you already have the ability to create a journal entry from the bank rec from the More Actions screen when you're on the Bank tab. And I'll be demoing some of this. Well, you now have the additional capability to create other receipts and to create manual payments from that Actions dropdown. So that's just making it faster, to be able to create these transactions instead of recording a journal entry, and it's going to help speed up your bank rec. And you're creating that directly from your bank data so that some of the information is going to be pre-filled for you. Another great improvement, if you're using bank feeds, is multiple account linking. So say you have 5, 10, different bank accounts with a single bank, and you want to be able to link, all your different accounts to your different cash accounts in Sage Intacct without having to go one by one. Well, they have now released that for you. So you have the capability to authorize your bank once and then link all of your different accounts at that bank to your different accounts in Sage Intacct. So that way you're not having to, connect them one by one. It saves a lot of time. If something happens with the connection and it needs to be refreshed, it can be a one-time process. So much easier, much more sustainable, much more scalable to manage. Having said that, if you need this capability, here's the email address. So this is not going to be turned on by default. If you need to have this capability turned on, Intacct will enable it, and then we will work with you to make sure that it is working fine for you and you can connect all your bank accounts. But there is a step in between, so if anybody needs that, just let us know and we can help facilitate that for you. Now announcing the death of Wells Fargo Payment Manager. So if you had Wells Fargo Payment Manager, pour one out, take a moment of silence. It is no longer going to be with us. The Wells Fargo Payment Manager is no longer an option to buy. If you still have Wells Fargo Payment Manager today, you are still supported on that subscription and you will still be able to use it. But in the future, you're probably going to see a lot of language and a lot of talk around finding an alternative solution to Wells Fargo Payment Manager. But it is no longer going to be offered as a new subscription. It is now only essentially grandfathered in. So before we get too much further, let me break up the monotony of you guys having to look at my slides and show you some demo of the features that I talked about. So the first thing I'm going to mention is 1099. So as I mentioned, if I look at a vendor screen here, so I'm going in, navigating to my vendors, and I say I want to go edit, and let me actually look at a view where I can see the 1099 box. So see a lot of these as miscellaneous box 7. I'm going to have a big problem if I keep that there. I'm going to get an error when I try to go process a bill because that box no longer exists. So let me edit this. This is the manual way of doing it, by the way. So this is one of a few approaches that you have available. And I would go to my vendor, go to additional information, click on Form 1099 here, and I can now say, first of all, you're going to notice, oh, hey, I can't pick a box 7 anymore. That doesn't exist. But you will also notice I can go to the dropdown, pick my non-employee compensation form, and maybe that's my box 1. I would think it normally is, and hit save. And then I'm going to save the vendor record. So I've now reassigned that. If I had transactions coded to that vendor, which I probably just don't in this demo environment, I would get a pop-up box inviting me to have Intacct reclass my previous payments. But so that's the change in a nutshell, and that's where that information and kind of accessibility to do that lives. Okay, a couple other changes. So on company here, I had mentioned you have an administrative contact. So Here you'll notice in my company information, my administrative contact is a drop-down list of my full admin users in my Intacct environment. If I wanted to make my guest user inactive over in my user list, I would have to swap them out with somebody else here first, or else I would get an error. Masking employee social security numbers is a global setting, so I can check this box, and then I'll be able to make sure that my employees' social security numbers are not exposed. In cash management, I mentioned on the checking account level, for example, I've got this bank account here where I've certainly transacted with this in the system already. So notice these fields are grayed out. I cannot touch my GL account or my location. My currency is read-only. So I can't mess with this because I've already transacted, I've already been reconciling it and working with it. Making a change of the GL account or the location potentially could give me a reconciliation mess. So the best practice is if you have a use case where you need to do that, create a new cash management checking account ID and create a new GL account so your reconciliations stay clean. In credit cards, notice here, I don't have Amex Payment Services turned on in this environment, so I wouldn't expect to see a card number field. And I don't see a card number field. But just for the sake of showing you something that is not an Amex, Visa as well, no card number field. So we are not showing credit card information anymore, as I said. Now in bank rec, if I go to my bank reconciliation here and go to my main checking account, open this up, I have bank feeds turned on here. So if I go over to my bank tab and I take a look at, I'm going to show all my transactions, not just my checks and debits, and apply my filter. If we look here on deposits and credits, my only option here used to be create journal entry. But if I look at my action menu, I can create an other receipt directly from this bank transaction. And it's brought some information in for me to start that off so that my life is a little bit easier. And then on the check or debit side, I can also create a manual payment. So same thing, I can click create manual payment, and it's going to bring over as much information as it can from the bank transaction to, again, make things faster and make the reconciliation more efficient. I don't have a demo of the multiple account linking, and I poured one out for Wells Fargo over here, but you can't see me because I'm on camera. Not on camera, rather, so just trust that. Oh, sorry, I needed to go from current slide. Let me back up to my general ledger session. Here we go. So, general ledger changes. This program here is an early adopter, so if you're interested in this, reach out to us and we can help facilitate this. But you may have seen some buzz about this at Advantage, and they've been talking about it for a while. GL outlier detection. So this is one of many first steps towards Intacct's increased focus on doing things with artificial intelligence. So here, they've actually released functionality where it's going to prompt a reviewer for journal entries if something about the journal entry is unusual and it's something that they should look into further. So in this example, you can see AI identified that the combination here of account department location and amount is unusual. It's not something based on the way that you normally behave and normally transact that you would see. So it shows you what are the outliers to help call attention to what requires a closer look. We're going to see a lot more of this kind of thing and of really exciting AI as Intacct continues to evolve and put out further releases, but this is one of the first steps to that end. And you know, this would not be a Jim Norton presentation if you didn't hear from me about dynamic allocations. So here we are. Dynamic Allocations has released an update. This is actually an update that I asked them for, so I'm extra excited about it. It gives you the capability to queue your dynamic allocations over time. So what that means is you could run allocations for an entire year now, and say I wanted to run them at 12/31 and run them looking backwards all the way to January 1. I can do that with recurring allocations. So what it's going to do is just run them month after month in the correct order, and each one will go when the last one finishes, and they won't bump into each other and make a mess like they used to. So it's a really great, potentially humongously time-saving improvement to dynamic allocations that allows you to do backward-looking adjustments to your allocation without a lot of work. The process used to be running them one by one for historical periods until you got to the current period, and then you could, pick up as usual. But now they have fixed that. So much appreciated. I'm sure anybody who's using dynamic allocations will enjoy this. And if you have any questions or would like to go over ways that you could take advantage of that, just let me know. Accounts receivable. Custom email templates have come to accounts receivable for invoices and statements. So previously, one of people's gripes was that in order to have a custom email template for an invoice or a statement, well, really just for an invoice, you had to use order entry. So they have now brought this functionality to AR so that you can use these email templates without necessarily having to use order entry if you don't have a good reason otherwise to use order entry. Now, order entry is a wonderful module, but we're just saying if you don't need it, you can do the email templates in AR if that was your only sticking point. You can default this in your AR configuration. You can default it on your customer record. You can also update. So if you have to apply different email templates to a lot of different customer records, you can update this via a CSV import. You have the ability to override on the printed email invoices screen, and you can send an email from the AR invoice lister, and I will show you this because I love this. Okay. And then AR email template default, just so you know the order of priority. So Intacct is going to look at this order when it's determining which email template to use. So if you override on the printer email invoices screen, that's going to win. If you don't have an override, the customer record is going to win. If there's nothing on the customer record, the AR configuration global setting is going to win. So that's the order that it looks to determine which email template am I going to use when I'm sending out this invoice or statement. Receive payment screen got a makeover. So some new functionality here. It has the new UI, which is one of the few screens left that did not have a new UI since Intacct changed it many moons ago. There's a new payment memo field, which people were asking for. You now have the ability to search by invoice number, which is big because that was not a thing before and that was painful for some people, especially if your customer is saying, here's the invoice number I'm paying, but you have 100 invoices outstanding for them. It'd be nice to search by that, wouldn't it? So we can. They've rolled out filter sets, so that's really getting down to searching for exactly what is being paid, and I'll demo this. It's really cool functionality. And then you can apply the payment based on invoice line items and apply the credit based on the invoice. So let's take a look at some of these enhancements that I just finished talking through in GL and AR. So in GL, we don't have outlier detection, but I think it was pretty self-explanatory kind of what that does. If anybody's interested in getting that in your environment as an early adopter, please let us know and we can help coordinate that. I will show you, so for dynamic allocations, queuing them over time, essentially I can set up a recurring allocation and I can say overhead, maybe. I'm calculating overhead for all my different projects so I can charge them whatever admin I spent. And maybe I wanted this to start back on January 1, 2020. Now notice, I'm sitting here on November 18th, 2020. So this implies that I want Intacct to look back. And we can certainly do that with dynamic allocations. I want this to never end, just like when I have a really good pumpkin spice latte. And then I want it to repeat maybe every month. So every 1 month, do this allocation. I can do an individual allocation. I can do a group of allocations. So maybe I've got a few that I wanted to just keep running. And then all I have to do is save that And Intacct is going to go off on its merry way and start computing and posting from January 1st all the way forward. So that's that process. It's a huge time saver, especially, if you're adding on dynamic allocations and you haven't run any allocations and maybe you're sitting here in December and you just turned it on. Well, you can have Intacct now look back and just catch up for you. Okay, so in AR, I mentioned accounts receivable templates for invoices. So say I'm on an invoice and say I'm just going to pick a random one here. This invoice for Julian for $50,000, and I want to email it. So if I go to email, notice this is one way you can do it. As I mentioned, there are several ways to determine where your email template comes from, but I now have a list of email templates. So here I have one that I created before, and I'm just going to email it to myself and hit OK. So that has now been scheduled for email delivery. I'm going to get an email from Intacct, obviously with that invoice. And, it can say pretty much whatever I want it to say, but mine in this case looks like this. Got my logo, got my message that I have asked it for, and an attachment of my invoice. So customization into what this email says, which you did not have before and a lot of people wanted when coming from AR. Now the receipt payments makeover that we referenced, if I go to receipt payments, you may notice, and of course, double check your permissions if you don't see this, but you have the old receive a payment, and then you have this new one that says received payments new. So if I click that, I see all my posted payments, but then I can also say add, and I can go to look for a payment. So now this is different. The screen looks different. We have more functionality. What I could do here is I could say select invoice, and this is going to take me to a list of all my invoices that are open throughout the system. And I have filtering capabilities here. So I can hit this filter and say, maybe I know that this invoice was an invoice that was created, or my invoice was dated, sometime between. So I could say is a range, my created date is a range of sometime between 6/1/20 and 10/31/20 and hit apply. So now I can filter down what I'm looking for really fast and really easy. This was not as easy to do before, of course. That's why they released it. Now we can save our filters if they're filters that we use a lot. And we have, the capability to, if I clear this out, filter on or search on a lot of different things. So maybe I know the invoice number. I can put in my invoice number here and look it up. Maybe any of these fields that I might know that are going to help me get at what did my customer pay, I can find that very easily. And you also have and or criteria in there. So really nice improvement. It's going to make it faster to get to what your customer paid. And again, we have the payment memo as an additional field that a lot of people were asking for. So you can have more information about that payment should you need it. Going fast because believe it or not, I've got like 50 slides left. So accounts payable, some of the changes in accounts payable. This is a big one for your AP aging report. You have the ability now to exclude credit card transactions from your AP aging and your AP ledger report. So one of the things that happened a lot is say you're recording your AP transactions in cash management. Those transactions were finding their way onto your AP aging report and confusing people because your AP aging did not tie to the trial balance amount for AP. So we used to come up with all kinds of clever workarounds for you all to fix that, to create vendor groups or to do entries to fix that. Well, now we don't have to do that because Intacct has rolled out a checkbox that says exclude credit card transactions from that report. So when you do that, anything that's happening, from charge card transactions that have not been cleared via charge payoffs will not be on your report, and your aging will tie to your TB. we've also released the ability to edit AP bills during the approval process. So AP bill approval is relatively new. I want to say it's a year old, if even. And the capability to edit AP bills during the approval process did not exist before. So what this meant was, if you submit an AP bill for approval, the approver used to have to decline that bill so that it would be editable, so that whoever submitted it could fix their coding or whatever they need to do and then resubmit. A lot of people were asking, how about I, as the approver, just make the change that I need instead of doing this back and forth song and dance? So, Intacct came out with this capability to, of course, assuming you have permissions, to edit a bill during approval. So, you can make sure that the totals of the bill obviously remain unchanged, but if you need to change the way things are broken out, then you can do that with this functionality. All right, keeping in theme with the outgoing cash kind of modules, talk about purchasing here. So transaction allocations are available in all of the different types of transactions in purchasing. Previously, you could only use transaction allocations if you were dealing with a posting transaction. And that became a little bit annoying because you may know the allocation before you get to the point of the transaction needing to post. You may know the allocation all the way back at the requisition stage, but you could not add the allocation to the document until you got to a posting document like a vendor bill. Well, now we've expanded those allocations so that they can be used on all purchasing documents. So if you have a requisition and you know that allocation all the way back at the requisition stage, great, add it to that transaction. And then as you're converting that transaction through your purchasing workflow, that allocation information will stay there with it so that you don't have to remember, oh, I have to go make sure I add this allocation when we get to a posting transaction. So very helpful, much more efficient. If you're using global consolidations and you needed to have standard kits, previously you needed to have a warehouse to do that. So Intacct has released a fix here where you can have non-inventory kits with global consolidations. If you have this use case and want to talk about it further, please let us know. I know it's a little bit of a corner case for some of the people who are on this call, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time covering it, but this has been released if it was a problem for you. It works in order entry. This does not work in contracts, so we're talking about order entry here. Other purchasing changes. So now we have the ability to have the subledger restrictions as to whether or not somebody can do a future dated transaction. So if you're doing a posting transaction and you don't want somebody to be able to future date it, we now have a checkbox where you can make the decision as to whether or not you want somebody to do that. And that's in configuration. I'll show you that in a moment. Also in the approval emails that go out for purchasing, these were a struggle for some international organizations because I think the example on this slide says it great. If the email date showed as 11/12/2020, if I'm sitting here in the US, I might know, okay, that's November 12th. But if I'm sitting over in the UK, or most other places in the world probably, I might wonder, does that mean November 12th? Am I supposed to assume that I have to follow the American date? Or does that mean December 11th? And there would probably be a big back and forth exchange to figure out what the date actually means. So Intacct has changed it to use a Word version of the date where it's very clear this is the month, November 12th, 2020. So that'll show up in your approval emails for purchasing so that your international folks are not confused. So let's do some demo of those changes. So AP and purchasing. We take a look first at AP aging report. If I go to vendor aging report, you will see very simply, there should be a checkbox to exclude credit card transactions, and here it is. So that little checkbox is going to save a whole lot of headache on reconciliation to your TB. and editing AP bills during approval. So I don't have any AP bills in this environment for approval, but basically on the approved bill screen, you will see an edit button now to be able to make your changes. So that's where that's going to live. In purchasing, as I mentioned, we have transaction allocations on any kind of transaction. So here, all the way back at the requisition stage, which is not posting to my GL, I can still add a transaction, and I have the allocation box now. So if I say, hey, I've got office supplies, I want to buy 1,000 of them, I want to use this allocation, general, and they're going to be $5 each. We're going to see, oh, sorry, maybe I'll do one at 5,000. We're going to see that broken out the way that I need it to be broken out. So that's what that's getting at. Okay, other purchasing, as we mentioned, the dates are going to be different. I don't need to demo that necessarily, but I will show you this new checkbox in your configuration, which you may want to consider turning on. This checkbox here that says use ledger and subledger restrictions for future posting dates. So basically what this means is, if I have a purchasing transaction that's configured to post directly to GL, then that purchasing transaction is going to use whatever setting I have in general ledger. So if I have a setting in general ledger that says do not allow future posting, I'm going to get an error when I try to future post with a purchasing transaction that hits GL. If I have a purchasing transaction that posts to accounts payable, then it's going to follow whatever rules I have set in accounts payable. So that's how that works. And that's what that checkbox does. But it is a new configuration option that you have. So double check your configuration screens and think about whether or not you might want to implement that. And if you would like to talk through the benefits of that or the risks of that, we are happy to do that. Okay, multi-tax. So for people with international offices and international operations, you are probably going to be very happy about this. So Sage Intacct is releasing MultiTax Engine capability. So for any client, already using Intacct, which is probably everyone on this call, R2 2021 is when you will have this capability. For new instances that are provisioned basically from now on, we'll have the capability to subscribe to MultiTax. Anybody who's already on Sage Intacct in R2 2021, which is going to be sometime around mid-year 2021, you're going to have capability to have a MultiTax engine. So what this does is we can help with actually submitting electronically via the with the Making Tax digital laws, your VAT returns over in the UK, calculating VAT on your transactions in the UK, having the great, invoice layouts and everything you need to have in the UK. There's also support for Australian GST and probably one or two other countries that I'm not thinking of off the top of my head. So there's going to be multi-tax capability. It is going to be available for anybody, obviously, who has international offices. And, if you're in the US, maybe you're using Avalara, but maybe for UK, you'll now be able to use Sage's tax engine. So more to come on this, but just so you know, this is imminently on the horizon. I have seen some great presentations on what it's going to look like, and it's going to be really exciting functionality for people with international operations. Okay, on the reporting front, there's been some nice changes in reporting, quite a few in this release. So for the interactive custom report writer, they've added some GL budget versus actual reporting capability. So we can now do budget versus actual interactive custom reports in the ICRW, and it looks something like what you see on this slide. So it's another capability to have some flexible variance analysis in your system. This next one, this is one of many things that came from customer ideas in the Sage Intacct release. So when we tell you, hey, you should log an idea for something in the community, this is a great example of why, because Sage Intacct is genuinely looking at the ideas that are in the community and taking action on the ones that are getting attention. So one of the ideas is have a dimension that people can't post to that I'm using for rollup. Where this commonly happens is parent-child dimensions. So in this example, I've got a management and general department, and I've got 5 dimensions underneath it that are child departments. Well, I don't want somebody to post directly to management in general. I want them to use the child departments, and then I want to use the parent management in general as a reporting roll-up. I get real tired of telling people not to post to management in general, so I created a smart rule, and I'm speaking as if I'm one of you right now. I noticed you may not have picked up on the change in personality when I'm not on camera, but you know, you get tired of having to do workarounds like, you know, create a smart rule to make sure that people don't code something in the wrong place. So that's where this idea kind of came from, and it works great now. So we can set a dimension as active non-posting. People will not be able to pick that dimension when they're doing transaction entry, but you'll still be able to use it for a reporting roll-up. And these are the current dimensions where they support this behavior. So you've got department, location, class, customer, vendor, and project, which honestly is where most of the parent-child is generally going on. Another great idea, which I will show you, is the ability to freeze the first column. So it's really great, you know, that Intacct gives you the capability to expand a report so wide. You can expand a report by project even if you have 200 projects, and you'll get 200 columns. Or you can expand a report by month even if you're looking at a couple of years, and you'll have a ton of different columns. And that's super helpful, but what was not super helpful was that your first column didn't freeze, so when you scrolled over far enough to the right, you forgot what you're looking at. So they've now released this capability where you can choose to freeze your first column so that you remember what you're looking at as you scroll over. And I will go to this next section and then demo some of this cool reporting functionality. So multi-entity shared and inter-entity transactions. What's going on in this arena? So first thing is, and this is not going to affect people who are not in what's called a single entity setup of Intacct, which very few people are. But if you are somebody who is on a single entity instance of Intacct, meaning that you do not see the capability to select a top level when you're in your Intacct instance, all those instances are eventually going to be migrated to a multi-entity shared structure. We don't know when that's going to be, that's longer term, but coming 2020 R4, which is right now. So if you are just coming on to Sage Intacct, you're in the process of doing your implementation, you're always going to be provisioned in what is called a multi-entity shared structure, which basically means it is super easy and scalable for you to add additional entities whenever you want. And that's really what the impact is for you. It's only positive. And there's some, you know, where some additional information here as to more information about multi-entity shared or working with multi-entity shared environments in the Learning Center, but that is that in a nutshell. Also, there's a checkbox on the user entity tab. So sometimes, you know, you want users to have access to the top level, even if they can only see 1 or 2 entities. They've now released this checkbox where you can enable access to the top level so that people can get at and maintain a shared dimension list, you know, without having to give them access to, you know, unrestricted everything. So that's what this checkbox does. Users always going to have access to the top level when they have access to 2 or more entities. But if you had somebody who only has access to 1 entity, but you also want them to see the top, now you can do that. New inter-entity transaction reporting. I know some people who will be very excited about this. So there is better, clearer, more transparent reporting about what your inter-entity transactions are so that you can see dimensional data behind those inter-entity transactions and descriptions, and you can group and sort and filter them. This works for all the transactions that were released as of when they did the upgrade for inter-entity transaction processing. So everything May 15th, 2020 forward. The legacy object, as you can see in the screenshot, is still available. So if you need to report on them, what we would call the old way, you still have that capability, but there's this great new enhanced inter-entity reporting, and you don't have to do anything to build it. That's the best part. you can go find this package custom report in your subscriptions list and turn it on, and you'll have access to it. So let me show you these great reporting enhancements that we just talked about. So the first one we're going to talk about is the non-posting dimension. And I'll use my department list here. I have my management and general list here with a bunch of different departments. And wouldn't it be nice if I could flag this as not posting? Well, if I go edit this management and general department, I can now set the status to active non-posting, and then they won't be able to post to it, but I can still use it for roll-up. So that's that. That's as simple as that gets. Now, if I'm looking at a financial report, say I'm looking at a financial report, here I've got my statement of revenues and expenditures by department, and let me go look at it for a year ago. Gee, this is wide. I wish I could see my columns when I moved over to the right, because by the time I get over here, I forgot what I'm looking at. Well, now in the gear button here, I can click freeze first column. This first column stays frozen, and I can scroll over, and I remember, what these are. And I can toggle between turning that on and off, freeze, unfreeze. Right? So it gives me that ability to review something and stay on screen rather than have that be the reason that I export something to Excel and lose the drill down. Just didn't make sense. So great little enhancement there, big time and efficiency saver. Your inter-entity transaction reporting. So you will notice, and I mentioned, if I go over to company, admin, subscriptions, this is where you can get at custom packages. So by the way, if you didn't know that, you may have some other custom packages you could install on this list too. So take a look through in your environment and see what's available here to be turned on, because you could have things that you have available to turn on that are out of the box custom reports that Intacct has already built for you. But the one that I'm talking about here, inter-entity transaction reports. So if this is not toggled on, simply toggle it on by clicking that button, and you'll have access to it. And what it looks like is, if I go to General Ledger and Custom Reports, it's going to add a report here that says IET report by account and location. And I can now run this report. Say I'm going to run it for the current year and hit View. And this gives me the detail of everything that's gone on in my inter-entity. So this is my GL account 1310 for entity 100. So I could see everything that entity 100 is owed from the other entities, and a description of the batch title, and the ability to drill down into the record number so that I can see where that came from. So greater visibility, easier visibility into your inter-entity transactions. All right, Intelligent Time, just a brief mention. There's a self-paced learning center content for the Intelligent Time functionality that Sage Intacct is rolling out. So this is their newest timesheet product, which gives you the capability to do mobile time entry and cloud-based time entry, from anywhere on any device. And it's going to use AI to try to help you fill out your timesheet. So it will have access to potentially, your calendar. It will know what you've done on your computer, and it will suggest, here's what you were working on. Here's what I think the timesheet entry is, and what project to code it to, and so forth. So it's going to help you, minimize some of the leakage that happens sometimes when people are manually recording time. So if you're interested in Sage Intelligent Time, please get in touch with us. We can help facilitate looking into that further and determining if you want to implement that, but that functionality is now being rolled out. In the contracts module, we've got some nice changes in contracts. So you now have the capability to invoice by customer instead of just by contract or just by project. So what this does is, now you can send one invoice to a customer that maybe has multiple contracts on it. Previously, you'd have to go contract by contract and generate those invoices. So this is a time saver. It also helps you if your customer says, I just want one invoice. Prorating partial months for billing. This was a huge one that we, used to drive us to create billing templates to figure out some weird prorated percentage for the first month. Now we don't have to do that. we have a checkbox. And finally, those of you who have implemented contracts a while ago probably know that there was a point where having the different books for ASC 605 and 606 was really important and required. Now we're kind of moving into the time period where that's old news. People might not need to report on 605 anymore, and they don't want to have to sit there and process multiple sets of schedules or remember not to click something. So we now have the capability to make your 605 book or journal 2 invisible so that you're not having to use that and keep up with that. And we can even show, choose whether or not we show journal 2 on our transaction entry screen. So let's take a quick look at some of that. So here I'm going to hop over to my Peppermint Swirl environment. You know what they say, when one supreme loses her powers, another strengthens. And Peppermint Swirl is no doubt the beverage of the winter. So here we are on a contract in Peppermint Swirl for Starbucks. And if we look at a prorated line here, see I have a contract that spans from 1/1 to 12/31, but then this next line, somebody added users midterm, and maybe that took effect starting on March 15th. Well, I need to send a prorated bill for half of March. How do I do that? Now I now have a checkbox that says prorate partial months. And if I look at the billing schedule, you can see that Intacct figured out, okay, here's what you need to charge them. Based on the number of days and what the daily rate comes out to, here's your prorated bill. And then going forward, here's your regular monthly billing. So super helpful functionality there. All right, what else? I am going to skip some things that I don't think are as intimately exciting. So in platform services, everything is upgraded for the most part to the Action UI. So basically it looks different. There's some additional query functionality on custom objects, and there's a new trigger log in the UI. And I can show you where to access that, but basically a list of all the different triggers that have happened in your environment. This is going to be really exciting for your developer type people and probably not exciting to anyone else. But that's what that functionality is, and it lives in company, and you have to make sure you have permissions to see that trigger log. In inventory, very big, long-awaited change of cycle counts. So previously, one of people's sticking points, things that they were not as happy about was that Sage Intacct did not have cycle counts in inventory. So now they have it. You're going to be able to capture that cycle count in Intacct, make the adjustments right there in Intacct. Obviously, it's a configuration choice, so we have to make sure that we turn on cycle counts if we need them. Then Intacct is going to create some transaction definitions for us to keep track of any adjustments that we've made during the cycle count. Don't forget, you need to be upgraded to advanced bins to see this option. Okay, the menu option, you're going to have a menu choice for cycle count. Again, remember, if you don't see something, the first thing you should probably always do is check your permissions. If you're not seeing a button that you think is supposed to be there, because so much is driven by permissions in Intacct, and permissions can be so granular that 6.5 out of 10 times it's probably permissions. Okay, so the user types that can work with this, a business user or a warehouse user. They can add, edit, view, and delete cycle counts. Only a business user is going to be able to reconcile or void. So that's kind of just a visual or a spoken representation of what this visual means. Certain user types can work with these, other types cannot. Make sure that you have the right permissions and make sure you have the right type of user if you are working with cycle counts. And this is what a cycle count setup looks like. So you give a description, talk about the warehouse that you're working with, specify whether or not you want to show the quantity on hand. Because sometimes you don't want to show the quantity on hand because you don't want people to just say, oh yeah, this is what the system says, so I'll accept it. You want them to actually count. Right? Then you select what you're going to count, obviously. Then they're going to go do the count. You're going to enter in the count. If there's a quantity counted or damaged or whatever, you're going to put that in here. and that'll enable that to flow through. And then the business user is going to be able to do the reconciliation process, which is going to let them see what adjustments need to be made. So your business user in inventory can reconcile. In the reconciliation process, you're going to be able to see, all right, here's what the adjustment is going to be. And they can make edits to this if they need to. And then finally, this is what the posting is going to look like. So the posting is going to obviously generate, ultimately, a journal entry, which is going to record any impact on inventory and put the offset where it needs to go. In order entry, and this is also related to invoicing, we now have the capability to do inter-entity COGS transactions when you sell inventory between entities. So basically what's happening is Intacct is recognizing when I have an inventory invoice, hey, the location for this invoice is different than the location that owns this warehouse. Picking up on that and generating an inter-entity transaction in the background. In order for this to happen, as you can see in the top graphic on the slide here, make sure that you enable inter-entity COGS journal entries, and then you can see what the impact of that is going to be. So all of this is stemming from this really great foundation that Intacct laid back in May when they made enhancements to the inter-entity transaction processing. And that is what made so many of these improvements possible, and this is a great example of that. We also have ship by dates in order entries, so now we can have, we can put in the estimated days in transit for an item, and then it's going to help to populate what the shipping dates, need by date, ship by date, so forth are on our order entry transactions. Don't forget to make sure that you select enable shipping dates in purchasing and order entry. Okay. Order entry, just like purchasing, has this checkbox for using the ledger and subledger restrictions. So if you have a future posting date, you can have order entry respect the settings that you have in GL or AR as it relates to being able to post things with future dates. You can have a customer PO number on a recurring sales order. This can be very helpful if you do have a recurring sales order and want to keep referencing a customer PO number. Whew, I never thought I would get through that in the time that I had. So I'm going to open it up for questions. I'll take a look at the chat. While I'm doing that, here is my contact information, of course. And let me know, if anybody has questions, always feel free to reach out to us. Please do make sure to send your inquiry to erpsupport@ddaftech.com so that we have multiple sets of eyes on it. And with that, do we see any questions in the chat? I don't think I've seen any.
There is one. We did get one. It is there an extra charge to turn on subscriptions like Interactive Report Writer?
In the case of Interactive Custom Report Writer, yes, that is an additional subscription. A lot of things that we talked about today are just part of the course. So if you have a specific piece of functionality that you are particularly interested in, just reach out to us and we can help you figure out, is that going to cost you extra or is that part of what I already have? All right, well, if no one else has any questions, we encourage you, always reach out to us if you think of something that you forgot to ask. We're always here to help. I appreciate everybody's time on this webinar. Look out for announcements about what we'll be presenting next. We do these CloudBytes every month. And I hope everybody has a great Thanksgiving next week and a safe holiday.